Bryant Bye Jennings. Bryant Bye Jennings versus Joseph Parker in the United States. It seems that Joseph Parker's promoter, David Higgins, is trying to get a fight for his fighter, Joseph Parker. And it seems like they're trying to make it happen in the United States on ESPN. Now, I personally think if this fight does get made, if Bryant Jennings versus Joseph Parker does get made, I personally think that's a good fight. And I think that's a good fight for both of these men because, A, it's a good fight for Joseph Parker because Bryant Jennings is a known guy. He's not a bum. You know, it's not like, because a lot of times when a fighter loses a fight for the first time, especially, they come back against a bum. How many times have you seen that happen? A guy loses a fight for the first time. He takes a 3-month break, oasis. He just disappears. And then he comes back against a guy with like 20 losses. Beating a guy with 20 losses means nothing. So I think this is a good fight for Joseph Parker when it comes to, he's not fighting a bum. He's fighting a guy who's known. I've been following Bryant Jennings' career, his entire career. Basically, this is a guy who fought and went the distance with Vladimir Klitschko when Klitschko was the unified champion. This is a guy who fought guys like Mike Perez, Luis Ortiz, and so on. So I think it's a good fight for him for the simple fact that Bryant Jennings is a known name. And I also think it's a good fight for Bryant Jennings because Bryant Jennings has been kind of irrelevant, ever since he lost against, because before he lost to Luis Ortiz, he was active. Prior to him getting knocked out against Luis Ortiz back in 2015, he was very active. He had fought, what's his name? Vladimir Klitschko, Arthur Spilka, Mike Perez. He was active. He was an active heavyweight. But once he lost to Luis Ortiz, he took like a 2-year layoff. And it wasn't until mid last year, where he came back. And he fought, I believe, Daniel Martz. I believe he's had 2 comeback fights, but he's been fighting very low-level guys. But it makes sense because, he was on a 2-year layoff. Right? He was on a 2-year layoff, so he's fought 2 bums. So this will be good for him because if he beats Joseph Parker, he'll be right in heavyweight contender mode, right away. Right now, like I said, he's kind of irrelevant. But like say he goes in there and he beats Joseph Parker, a guy who was a former champion. A guy who was just in a really big fight with Anthony Joshua. If he manages to beat Joseph Parker, that's going to make him relevant again. Everyone's going to be saying, I want to see Bryant Jennings versus Anthony Joshua. Or I want to see Bryant Jennings versus, Dillian White. Or Bryant Jennings possibly versus Deontay Wilder. By the way, Deontay Wilder ducked him. But that's what people will be saying. Especially, even if he loses but does a good performance. Like say he loses but he puts in a really good performance and it's a very competitive fight, people will still be talking about Bryant Jennings more than they are talking about him now. Because like I said, his problem is he's been very irrelevant ever since he lost to Luis Ortiz. But he's been slowly making his comeback. So I think it's kind of a risky fight. I follow Bryant Jennings' Instagram and I see that he's very ambitious. You look at his Instagram posts, you could tell that he wants to get back into, fighting the top quality guys. So this will be his chance if this fight gets made, if he accepts the fight, for him to get back in that, big fight. He's, like I said, he's had, I believe, 2 or 3 comeback fights. So him beating Joseph Parker, or at least being in a big fight with Joseph Parker, would be good for his career. Like I said, even if he loses, if he puts in a good performance, you know what I'm saying? And like I said, when it comes to Joseph Parker, although Bryant Jennings has been kind of irrelevant, he is a name. I know who he is. You know who he is if you're a boxing fan, if you're a heavyweight boxing fan. You know who Bryant Jennings is. Bryant Jennings is not a guy with like 20 losses. Bryant Jennings only has 2 losses, and it's to 2 elite guys, Vladimir Klitschko, Luis Ortiz. So who would I be favoring in this fight? I would be favoring Joseph Parker just because he's been fighting the more higher quality fights, quality fighters as of late. He just got finished fighting Anthony Joshua. He was in there with guys like Andy Ruiz. He's been very active, even Hughie Fury. Although Bryant Jennings has fought guys like Vladimir Klitschko and Luis Ortiz, which are top guys, he's been, like I said, very inactive 2 years. And although he's fought these 2 comeback fights, these guys were very low level guys. So does he still have what it takes to compete with the top level guys? I would think so. One thing I will tell you though is whoever wins this fight, I doubt the guy will win via knockout, because Bryant Jennings, in my opinion, has a really good chin. I know he got knocked out against Luis Ortiz, but when he fought Vladimir Klitschko was landing bombs on Bryant Jennings. And Vladimir Klitschko is known as a big puncher. And what's his name? Bryant Jennings took everything that Vladimir Klitschko had to offer. You know, Vladimir Klitschko is a guy who, I mean, just look at when he fought Kurat Pulev. He destroyed Kurat Pulev, and he was hitting Bryant Jennings with some of the same punches he landed on Kurat Pulev. So I've always felt that Bryant Jennings had a good chin. Like I said, he got knocked out against Luis Ortiz, but he wasn't brutally knocked out. He was dropped by an uppercut. And again, Luis Ortiz himself is a big puncher. And like I said, the reason I think he's going to go the distance if they do end up fighting is because Joseph Parker is not a big puncher. He's never been a big puncher. So I doubt that he would be able to knock out someone like Bryant Jennings. And Bryant Jennings is not a big puncher. And Joseph Parker has a good chin. So this is basically a fight between 2 guys who have good chins. So the fact that Bryant Jennings has a good chin and Joseph Parker is not a big puncher, and the fact that Joseph Parker has a good chin and Bryant Jennings is not a big puncher, lets me know that this fight would go the distance. I like the fact that it's happening. You see, this is what I'm telling you guys. You know, people keep saying, you know, Anthony Joshua doesn't have to leave America, the UK because he's so big there. But look at a lot of fighters, like I said, who have fought in the UK, who were big just like AJ, have left their country. Look at Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker could probably stay in New Zealand his entire career, but he went to fight Joshua in the UK. And if this fight gets made, he'll be fighting in the United States against Bryant Jennings. You know, in New Zealand, they probably would love to welcome him back to a hometown fight, right? Because even though, you know, I'm pretty sure that they will welcome Joseph Parker with open arms in New Zealand, he could easily have, you know, Bryant Jennings go over there and he'll make his first comeback fight after losing to AJ in New Zealand. But if he takes the fight, then he'll be fighting in the United States. So it just goes to show you, fighters travel. You know, fighters travel. So I don't want to hear this excuse that, you know, he's a big name and he has to stay in the UK his whole career, aka Anthony Joshua. No, fighters travel. Like I said, I'll be favoring Joseph Parker, but I think this is a good fight. I think this is a good fight for both, like the way I explained it. And like I said, I'm not hating on this fight. I think it's a good fight. I'd like to see it. Anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think of this fight. Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys think if this fight does get made, you guys think it is a good fight? And who do you guys got winning? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section of this video. And I'm out.